Hello, everybody. I've been gone for a very long time. So, I'm going to try to make this stream a little bit longer and come out with some content because of all the time I've missed. So, last time I left off on chapter 42, and I'm not going to pretend to remember what happened. But we are now on chapter 43, A Warrior and a Healer. Saphira drifted down to a clearing, landing on the crest of a hill, and rested her outstretched wings on the ground. Eragon could feel her shaking beneath him. They were only half a league from Gilead. Picketed in the clearing were Snowfire and Tornak, who snorted nervously at Saphira's arrival. Eragon slid down to the ground and immediately turned to Saphira's injuries, while Murtagh readied the horses. Unable to see well in the darkness, Eragon ran his hands blindly over Saphira's wings. He found 3 places where the arrows had punctured the thin membrane, leaving bloody holes as thick around his thumb. A small piece had also been torn out of the back edge of her left wing. She shivered when his fingers brushed the injuries. He tiredly healed the wounds with words from the ancient language. Then he went to the arrow that was embedded in one of the large muscles of her flying arm. The arrowhead poked through its underside. Warm blood dripped off it. Eragon called to Murtagh and instructed, "Hold her wing down. I have to remove this arrow." He indicated where Murtagh should grip. "This will be painful," he warned Saphira, "but it will be over quickly. Try not to struggle. You'll hurt us." She extended her neck and grabbed a tall sapling between her curved teeth. With a yank of her head, she pulled the tree out of the ground and clamped it firmly in her jaws. "I'm ready." "Okay," said Eragon. "Hold on," he whispered to Murtagh, then broke off the head of the arrow, trying not to cause any more damage. He swiftly pulled the shaft out of Saphira. As it left her muscle, she threw back her head and whimpered past the tree in her mouth. Her wing jerked involuntarily, clipped Murtagh under the chin, and knocked him to the ground. With a growl, Saphira shook the tree, spraying them with dirt before tossing it away. After Eragon sealed the wound, he helped Murtagh up. "She caught me by surprise," admitted Murtagh, touching his scraped jaw. "I'm sorry. She didn't mean to hit you," assured Eragon. He checked on the unconscious elf. "You're going to have to carry her a bit longer," he told Saphira. "We can't take her on the horses and ride fast enough. Flying should be easier for you now that the arrow is out." Saphira dipped her head. "I will do it." "Thank you," said Eragon. He hugged her fiercely. "What you did was incredible. I'll never forget it." Her eyes softened. "I will go now." He backed away as she flew up in a flurry of air, the elf's hair streaming back. Seconds later, they were gone. Eragon hurried to Snowfire, pulling himself into the saddle, and galloped away with Murtagh. While they rode, Eragon tried to remember what he knew about the elves. They had long lives. That fact was oft repeated, although he did not know how long. They spoke the ancient language, and many could use magic. After the rider's fall, elves had retreated into seclusion. None of them had been seen in the Empire since. So why is one here now? And how did the Empire manage to capture her? If she can use magic, she's probably drugged as I was. They traveled through the night, not stopping even when their sapping strength began to slow them. They continued onward, despite burning eyes and clumsy movements. Behind them, lines of torch-bearing horsemen searched around Gilead for their trail. After many bleary hours, dawn lightened the sky. By unspoken consent, Eragon and Murtagh stopped the horses. "We have to make camp," said Eragon wearily. "I must sleep, whether they catch us or not." "Agreed," said Murtagh, rubbing his eyes. "Have Saphira land. We'll meet her." They followed Saphira's directions and found her drinking from a stream at the base of a small cliff. The elf still slouched on her back. Saphira greeted them with a soft bugle as Eragon dismounted. Murtagh helped them remove the elf from Saphira's saddle and lowered her to the ground. Then they sagged against the rock face, exhausted. Saphira examined the elf curiously. "I wonder why she hasn't woken. It's been hours since we left Gilead." "Who knows what they did to her," said Eragon grimly. Murtagh followed their gaze. "As far as I know, she's the first elf the king has captured. Ever since they went into hiding, he's been looking for them without success, until now." So he's either found their sanctuary, or she was captured by chance. I think it was chance. If he had found the Elven Haven, they would have declared war and sent his army after the elves. Since that hasn't happened, the question is, were Galbatorix's men able to extract the elves' location before we rescued her? We won't know until she regains consciousness. Tell me what happened after I was captured. How did I end up in Gilead? The Urgles are working for the Empire, said Murtagh shortly, pushing back his hair. And, it seems, the Shade as well. Saphira and I saw the Urgles give you to him. Though, I didn't know it was at the same time, and a group of soldiers. They were the ones who took you to Gilead. It's true, said Saphira, curling up next to them. Aragon's mind flashed back to the Urgles he had spoken with at Tyrm, and the master they had mentioned. They meant the king. I insulted the most powerful man in Iglesia, he realized with dread. Then remembered the horror of the slaughtered villagers in Yazwak. A sick, angry feeling welled in his stomach. The Urgles were under Galbatorix's orders. Why would he commit such an atrocity on his own subjects? Because he is evil, stated Saphira flatly. Glowering, Aragon exclaimed, This will mean war. Once the people of the Empire learn of it, they will rebel and support the Varden. Murtagh rested his chin on his hand. Even if they heard of this outrage, few would make it to the Varden. With the Urgles under his command, the king has enough warriors to close the Empire's borders and remain in control, no matter how disruptive people are. With such a rule of terror, he will be able to shape the Empire however he wants. And though he is hated, people could be galvanizing to join him if they had a common enemy. Who would that be? Asked Aragon, confused. The elves in the Varden. With the right rumors, they can be portrayed as the most despicable monsters in all of Glacia. Fiends who are waiting to seize your land and wealth. The Empire could even say that the Urgles have been misunderstood all this time, and that they were really friends and allies against such terrible enemies. I only wonder what the king promised them in return for their services. It wouldn't work, said Aragon, shaking his head. No one could be deceived that easily about Galbatorix and the Urgles. Besides, why would he want to do that? He's already in power. But his authority is challenged by the Varden, with whom people sympathize. There's also Serta, which has defied him since it seceded from the Empire. Galbatorix is strong within the Empire, but his arm is weak outside of it. As for people seeing through his deceptions, they'll believe whatever he wants them to. It's happened before. Murtagh fell silent and gazed moodily into the distance. His words troubled Aragon. Saphira touched him with her mind. Where is Galbatorix sending the Urgles? What? In both Carb Hall and Term, you heard Urgles were leaving the area and migrating southeast, as if to brave the Hederic Desert. If the king truly does control him, why is he sending them in that direction? Maybe an Urgle army is being gathered for his private use, or an Urgle city is being formed. Aragon shuddered at the thought. I'm too tired to figure it out. Whatever Galbatorix's plan will only cause us trouble. I just wish that we knew where the Varden are. It's where we should be going, but we're lost without Dormund. Doesn't matter what we do, the Empire will find us. Don't give up, she said encouragingly, then added dryly, though you're probably right. Thanks. He looked at Murtagh. You risked your life to rescue me. I owe you for that. I couldn't have escaped on my own. It was more than that, though. There was a bond between them now, welded by the brotherhood of battle and tempered by the loyalty Murtagh had shown. I'm just glad I could help. Murtagh faltered and rubbed his face. My main worry now is how we're going to travel, with so many men searching for us. Gilead soldiers will be hunting us tomorrow. Once they find the horse's tracks, they'll know you didn't fly away with Saphira. Aragon glumly agreed. How did you manage to get into the castle? Murtagh laughed softly. By playing a steep bribe, crawling through a filthy, squirrely chute. But the plan wouldn't have worked without Saphira. He stopped and directed his words at her. That is, you are the only reason we escaped alive. Aragon solemnly put a hand on her scaly neck. As she hummed contentedly, he gazed at the elf's face, captivated. Reluctantly, he dragged himself upright. We should make a bed for her. Murtagh got to his feet and stretched out the blanket for the elf. When they lifted her onto it, the A, the cuff of her sleeve tore on a branch. Aragon began to pinch the fabric together, then gasped. The elf's arm was molted with a layer of bruises and cuts. Some were half-healed, while others were fresh and oozing. Aragon shook his head with anger and pulled the sleeve up higher. The injuries continued to her shoulder. With trembling fingers, he unlaced the back of her shirt, dreading what might be under it. As the leather slipped off, Murtagh cursed. The elf's back was strong and muscled, but it was covered with scabs that made her skin look dry, like cracked mud. She had been whipped mercilessly and branded with hot irons in the shape of claws. Where her skin was still intact, it was purple and black from numerous beatings. On her left shoulder was a tattoo inscribed with indigo ink. It had the same symbol that had been on the sapphire of Brom's ring. Aragon silently swore an oath that he would kill whoever was responsible for torturing the elf. "Can you heal this?" asked Murtagh. I don't know," said Aragon. He swallowed back sudden queasiness. "There's so much." "Aragon," said Saphira sharply, "this is an elf. She cannot be allowed to die. Tired or not, hungry or not, you must save her. I will meld my strength with yours, but you are the one who must wield the magic." "Yes, you are right," he murmured, unable to tear his eyes from the elf. Determined, he pulled up his gloves and said to Murtagh, "This is going to take some time. Can you get me food? Also, boil rags for bandages. I can't heal all her wounds." "We can't make a fire without being seen," objected Murtagh. "You'll have to use unwashed clothes, and the food will be cold." Aragon grimaced, but acquiesced. As he gently laid a hand on the elf's spine, Saphira settled next to him, her glittering eyes fixed on the elf. He took a deep breath, then reached for the magic and started working. He spoke the ancient words, "Wise heal." A burn shimmered under his palm, and new, unmarked skin flowed over it, joining together without a scar. He passed over the bruises and other wounds that were not life-threatening. Healing them all would consume the energy he needed for more serious injuries. As Aragon toiled, he marveled that the elf was still alive. She had been repeatedly tortured to the edge of death with a precision that chilled him. Although he tried to preserve the elf's modesty, he could not help but notice that underneath the disfiguring marks, her body was exceptionally beautiful. He was exhausted and didn't dwell upon it, though his ears turned red at times, and he fervently hoped that Saphira did not know what he was thinking. He labored through dawn, pausing only at brief intervals to eat and drink, trying to replenish himself from his fast. The escape, and now healing the elf. Saphira remained by his side, lending her strength where she could. The sun was well into the sky when he finally stood, groaning at his cramped muscles, as his cramped muscles stretched. His hands were gray and his eyes felt dry and gritty. He stumbled to the saddlebags and took a long drink from a wineskin. "Is it done?" asked Murtagh. Aragon nodded, trembling. He did not trust himself to speak. The camp spun before him. He nearly fainted. "You did well," said Saphira soothingly. "Will she live?" I don't know," he said in a ravaged voice. "Elves are strong, but even they cannot endure abuse like this without impunity. If I knew more about healing, I might be able to revive her, but..." He gestured helplessly. His hand was shaking so badly he spilled some of the wine. Another swig helped to steady him. "We'd better start riding again." "No, you must sleep," protested Murtagh. I can sleep in the saddle, but we can't afford to stay here, not with the soldiers closing in on us." Murtagh reluctantly gave in. "In that case, I'll lead Snowfire while you rest." They resaddled the horses, strapped the elf onto Saphira, and departed the camp. Aragon ate while he rode, trying to replace his depleted energy before he leaned forward against Snowfire and closed his eyes. That is the end of that chapter, and I have one thing to do, and I'll be back to read the next one. I left my TV on and it was heating up the room. Alright, so that was 43. Chapter 44. Water from sand. When they stopped for the evening, Aragon felt no better and his temper had worsened. Most of the day had been spent on long detours to avoid detection by soldiers with hunting dogs. He dismissed Snowfire and asked Saphira, "How is she?" "I think worse than before." She stirred slightly a few times, but that was all. Saphira crouched low on the ground and let him lift the elf out of the saddle. For a moment, her soft form pressed against Aragon. Then he hurriedly put her down. He and Murtagh made a small dinner. It was difficult for him to fight off the urge to sleep. When they had eaten, Murtagh said, "We can't keep up this pace. We aren't gaining any ground on the soldiers. Another day or two of this and they'll be sure to overtake us." "What else can we do?" snapped Aragon. "If it were just the two of us and you would be willing to leave Tornak behind, Saphira could fly us out of here, but with the elf too? Impossible." Murtagh looked at him carefully. "If you want to go on your own, I won't stop you. I can't expect you and Saphira to stay and risk imprisonment." "Don't insult me," Aragon muttered. "The only reason I'm free is because of you. I'm not going to abandon you to the Empire. Poor thanks that would be." Murtagh bowed his head. "Your words hearten me." He paused. "But they don't solve our problem." "What can?" asked Aragon. He gestured at the elf. "I wish she could tell us where the elves are. Perhaps we could seek sanctuary with them." "Considering how they protected themselves, I doubt she'd reveal their location. Even if she did, the others of her kind might not welcome us. Why would they want to shelter us anyway? The last riders they had contact with were Galbatorix and the Forsworn. I doubt that left them with pleasant memories. And I don't even have a dubious honor about being a rider like you." "The dubious honor of being a rider like you. No, they wouldn't want me at all." "They would accept us," said Saphira confidently as she shifted her wings to the more comfortable position. Aragon shrugged. "Even if they would protect us, we can't find them, and it's impossible to ask the elf until she regains consciousness. We must flee, but in which direction? North, south, east, or west?" Murtagh laced his fingers together and pressed his thumbs against his temples. "I think the only thing we can do is leave the Empire. The few safe places within it are far from here. It would be difficult to reach without being caught or followed. There's nothing for us here. There's nothing for us to the north, except for the forest due Weldenvarden, which we might be able to hide in, but I don't relish going past Gilead. Only the Empire and the sea lie westward. To the south is Serda, where you might be able to find someone to direct you to the Varden. As for going east," he shrugged. "To the east is the Hederic Desert. It stands between us and whatever land exists in that direction. The Varden are somewhere across it, but without directions it might take us years to find them." "We would be safe, though," remarked Saphira, "as long as we don't encounter any Urgles." Aragon knitted his brow. A headache threatened to drown his thoughts in hot throbs. "It's too dangerous to go to Serda. We would have to traverse most of the Empire, avoiding every town and village. There are too many people between us and Serda to get there unnoticed." Murtagh raised an eyebrow. "So you want to go across the desert?" "I don't see any other options. Besides, that way we can leave the Empire before the Razak get here. With their flying steeds, they'll probably arrive in Gilead in a couple of days, so we won't have much time." "Even if we do reach the desert before they get here," said Murtagh, "they could still overtake us. It'll be hard to outdistance them all." Aragon rubbed Saphira's side, her scales rough under his fingers. "That's assuming they can follow our trail. To catch us, though, they'll have to leave the soldiers behind, which is to our advantage. If it comes to a fight, I think the three of us can defeat them, as long as we aren't ambushed the way Brahm and I were." "If we reach the other side of the Hederic safely," said Murtagh slowly, "where will we go? Those lands are well outside the Empire. There will be few cities, if any, and then there's the desert itself. What do you know of it?" "Only that it's hot, dry, and full of sand," confessed Aragon. "That about sums it up," replied Murtagh. "It's filled with poisonous and inedible plants, venomous snakes, scorpions, and the blistering sun. You saw the Great Plain on our way to Gilead." It was a rhetorical question, but Aragon answered it anyway. Yes, and once before. Then you are familiar with its immense range. It fills the heart of the Empire. Now imagine something 2 or 3 times its size, and you'll understand the vastness of the Hederic Desert. That is what you're proposing to cross. Aragon tried to envision a piece of land that gigantic, but was unable to grasp the distances involved. He retrieved a map of a glacier from his saddlebags. The parchment smelled musty as he unrolled it on the ground. He inspected the plains and shook his head in amazement. No wonder the Empire ends at the desert. Everything on the other side is too far away for Galbatorix to control. Murtagh swept his hand over the right side of the parchment. All the land behind the desert, which is blank on this map, is under one rule when the riders lived. If the king were to raise up new riders under his command, it would allow him to expand the empire to an unprecedented size. But that wasn't the point I was trying to make. The Hederic Desert is so huge that it contains many dangers. The chances are slim that we can cross it unscathed, and it's a desperate path to take. We are desperate, said Aragon firmly. He studied the map carefully. If we rode through the belly of the desert, it would take well over a month, perhaps even 2 to cross it. But if we angle southeast towards the Bear Mountains, we could cut through much faster. We can either follow the Bear Mountains further east into the wilderness or go to Serta. If this map is accurate, the distance between here and the Bears is roughly equal to that we covered on our way to Gilead. But that nearly took us a month. Aragon shook his head impatiently. Our ride to Gilead was slow on account of my injuries. If we press ourselves, it'll only take a fraction of that time to reach the Bear Mountains. Enough, you made your point, acknowledged Murtagh. But before I consent, however, something must be solved. As I'm sure you noticed, I brought supplies for us and the horses while I was in Gilead. But how can we get enough water? The roving tribes who live in the Hederic Desert usually disguise their wells as oases, so no one can steal their water, and carrying enough for more than 1 day is impractical. Just think about how much Saphira drinks. She and the horses consume more water at one time than we do in a week. Unless you can make it rain whenever we need, I don't see how you can go the direction you propose. Aragon rocked back on his heels. Making it rain was well beyond his power. He suspected that not even the strongest rider could have done it. Moving that much air was like trying to lift a mountain. He needed a solution that would not drain all of his strength. I wonder if it's possible to convert sand into water. That would solve our problem, but only if it doesn't take too much energy. I have an idea, he said. Let me experiment. I'll give you an answer. Aragon strode out of the camp with Saphira following closely. What are you going to try? She asked. I don't know, he muttered. Saphira, could you carry enough water for us? She shook her enormous head. No, I wouldn't even be able to lift that much weight, let alone fly with it. Too bad. He knelt and picked up a stone with a cavity large enough for a mouthful of water. He pressed a clump of dirt into the hollow and studied it thoughtfully. Now came the hard part. Somehow he had to convert the dirt into water. But what word should I use? He puzzled at it for a moment, then picked 2 he hoped would work. The icy magic rushed through him, and he breached the familiar barrier in his mind and commanded, Deloi moi. Immediately, the dirt began to absorb his strength. At a prodigious rate, Aragon's mind flashed back to Brahm's warning that certain tasks could consume all his power and take his life. Panic blossomed in his chest. He tried to release the magic, but could not. It was linked to him until the task was complete or he was dead. All he could do was just remain motionless, growing weaker every moment. Just as he began convinced that he would die kneeling there, the dirt shimmered and was morphed into a thimbleful of water. Relieved, Aragon sat back, breathing hard. His heart pounded painfully and hunger gnawed at his innards. What happened? Asked Saphira. Aragon shook his head, still in shock from the drain on his body's reserves. He was glad that he had not tried to transmute anything larger. This won't work, he said. I don't even have the strength to give myself to drink it. You should have been more careful, she chided. Magic can yield unexpected results when the ancient words are combined in new ways. He glared at her. I know that, but this was the only way I could test my idea. I wasn't going to wait until we were in the desert. He reminded himself that she was only trying to help. How did you turn Brahm's grave into diamond without killing yourself? I can barely handle a bit of dirt, much less that sandstone. I don't know how I did it, she stated calmly. It just happened. Could you do it again, but this time make water? Aragon, she said, looking him squarely in the face. I've no more control over my abilities than a spider does. Things like that occur whether I will them to or not. Brahm told you that unusual events happen around dragons. He spoke truly. He gave no explanation for it, nor do I have one. Sometimes I can work changes just by feel, almost without thought. The rest of the time, like right now, I'm as powerless as Snowfire. You're never powerless, he said softly, putting a hand on her neck. For a long period they were both quiet. Aragon remembered the grave he had made and how Brahm lay within it. He could still see the sandstone flowing over the old man's face. At least we gave him a decent burial, he whispered. He idly swirled a finger in the dirt, making twisting ridges. Two of the ridges formed a miniature valley, so he added mountains around it. With his fingernail he scratched a river down the valley, then deepened it because it seemed too shallow. He added a few more details until he found himself staring at a passable reproduction of Palangar Valley. Homesickness welled up within him, and he obliterated the valley with a swipe of his hand. I don't want to talk about it, he muttered angrily, staving off Saphira's questions. He crossed his arms and glared at the ground. Almost against his will, his eyes flicked back to where he had gouged the earth. He straightened, surprised. Though the ground was dry, the furrow he had made was lined with moisture. Curious, he scraped away more dirt and found a damp layer a few inches under the surface. Look at this, he said excitedly. Saphira lowered her nose to this discovery. How does this help us? Water in the desert is sure to be buried deeply. We would have to dig weeks to find it. Yes, said Aragon delightedly. But as long as it's there, I can get it. Watch. He deepened a hole, then mentally accessed the magic. Instead of changing the dirt into water, he simply summoned forth the moisture that was already in the earth. With a faint trickle, water rushed into the hole. He smiled and sipped from it. The liquid was cool and pure, perfect for drinking. See? We can get all we need. Saphira sniffed the pool. Here, yes. But in the desert, there may not be enough water in the ground for you to bring it to the surface. It will work, Aragon assured her. All I'm doing is lifting the water, an easy enough task. As long as it's done slowly, my strength will hold. Even if I have to draw the water from 50 paces down, it won't be a problem, especially if you help me. Saphira looked at him dubiously. Are you sure? Think carefully upon your answer, for it will mean our lives if you are wrong. Aragon hesitated, and then said firmly, I'm sure. Then go tell Murtagh. I will keep watch while you sleep. But you've stayed up all night like us, he objected. You should rest. I'll be fine. I'm stronger than you know, she said gently. Her scales rustled as she curled up with a watchful eye, turned northward, towards their pursuers. Aragon hugged her, and she hummed deeply, sides vibrating. Go. He lingered, then reluctantly returned to Murtagh, who asked, Well, is the desert open to us? It is, acknowledged Aragon. He flopped onto his blankets and explained what he had learned. When he finished, Aragon turned to the elf. Her face was the last thing he saw before falling asleep. And that is the end of those two chapters. And I'm going to do a little bit more in a few minutes.